Good morning, everyone. This is Carl Polachuk. Welcome to our webinar series, Globalization of SMB. And we are joined today by a very special guest, Mr. Robert Crane, all the way from Sydney, Australia. Welcome, sir.
Welcome, Carl. How are you going?
Pretty good. So one of the reasons that I have Robert on is because he is such a great participator in the community as a whole. And, a piece of that is that it's the middle of the night in Sydney, right? So let me just take a minute to talk about what we're doing on the series here. We have a lot of great people lined up. We started last month with Harry Brailsford and talked about, kind of the beginning of the SMB community and how that's been somewhat global from day one. And, Harry travels all over the place. Today, Robert is with us and talking specifically about, his experiences. He travels back and forth more than I ever would from the other side of the world. And next time, we're going to talk to Ken Edwards, who's moving into some really cool plans to the far reaches of the world, travels to China and creates products and so forth. Then we got Dave Sobel coming up from Max Focus and lots more. So sign up and tune in, and we will be here every month to talk about, how we need to be fit into the bigger picture. For a long time, Americans and other people, traveled a great deal. Obviously, the British traveled all over the world 150, 200 years ago. So now the rest of us are kind of, catching up with that. But I think that we went through this period in the early part of the 20th century where people really kind of liked the idea of staying home and not traveling much. And the world has always been pretty flat. We're just realizing that again as we have our economies grow and intertwine more and more. So, whoops, let me, I may have the wrong slide deck. Uh-oh. Hold on one second. How is it possible that I'm not seeing the same slides here? Huh. One second here. Technical difficulties. Huh. There we go. Well, I'm going to do this view because I can't get the other one to work. I find this odd. Anyway, so today we're talking to Robert Crane, who is an author and has been an longtime expert in SharePoint and is now a Microsoft MVP for Office 365. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, and one of the cool things about Robert is he travels a lot, and I love doing stuff with him. We have seen each other in many different cities, most recently Redmond, I think. Well, no, most recently Sydney. So,
yes, all the way down here to our long-forgotten land.
So why don't you tell me a bit about why you travel, because you clearly don't have to travel as much as you do.
I think at the end of the day, the reality is that, like I said, the world is flat. I come from a population of 26 odd million people, compared to your market of 300 million. So you're about at least 10 times our size. So from a purely economic point of view, that's where we're looking at making sense, because any product, anything you want to sell perhaps, or anything that you want to get involved with is generally going to be where a larger population is. And from the other side of the coin, there's also the fact that it's the home of things like Microsoft and the Google and the Apple and all those sort of places as well. So especially the US is definitely the source of technology. But again, you can branch out and look at Europe. You can branch out and look at other areas that the populations are. But yeah, when it comes down to it, the population size makes a big reason for looking outside, certainly Australia anyway.
All righty. And one second, I think I figured out what I'm doing here. I'd hidden all of my slides, so of course I couldn't see them. There we go. So when you travel, is this something that you would say is something that the other folks in Australia should do more of? I mean, when you think about it, is it just good for your business because of the nature of your business, or do you think that everybody would benefit from more travel?
Well, I think it gives you the IT gives you the opportunity certainly to travel and to be able to do that in a business context. So there are obviously, it's financially quite expensive to do. So people think that traveling for business you may get firstly reimbursed for everything. You probably don't in a lot of cases. I work for myself, so in a lot of cases I've got to fork out the money to do it. So there is that cost, but on the other side, I think that the benefit you get of traveling for business is the connections that you make, and that makes things so much more enjoyable. So rather than visiting a place and simply being a tourist, you can have some connections there. They can take you around, show you the sights, make you feel far more welcome than normally if you've just been a tourist. So I think that's the benefit it can provide, is those personal connections, which obviously can give you an advantage business-wise, but also make the experience far more enjoyable when you do it.
And in addition to the MVP program, do you belong to other groups where there's an international membership?
I think indirectly, there's certainly there's certainly membership, international membership of all organisations these days. They're all looking very much internationally. So they probably vary in their degree, but still a lot of stuff's local. But yeah, I think that any organisation does need to look beyond its borders to really appreciate what's going on in the broader market. So that's made easier with technologies like we're using today, GoToMeetings, Skype. All that sort of stuff means that your ability to connect outside your local village is so much easier to do these days.
Now, the one part that's obviously difficult is the time zone, because you are clearly joining us in the middle of the night, and we greatly appreciate that.
It's not quite the middle of the night. It's quite the very early morning, so it's not quite that bad.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's 4-ish?
Correct.
Okay. So for a lot of people, 4 o'clock is the middle of the night. So you talk to a 20-year-old, it's the middle of the night. So
I gave that up a long time ago, Carl.
So, but you must get up early in the morning a lot in order to work with folks in the U.S.
Well, you can, but also I think a lot of it, because of the recording, you can record and watch it later. But yeah, if you want to interact directly, there certainly is the need to do that. And again, most people you can schedule options for, either early morning or late in the afternoon. So people like Microsoft have been very good of late by scheduling a number of, webinars or conferences. So they may do two options: an early morning, for them to catch Europe and places like that, and then late afternoon to catch places like us out here in the Pacific. So I think people like Microsoft and other multinationals are becoming more cognizant of the fact that there are lots of people outside their normal time zone. So I think that's becoming much better. So it's not such a hike to do this all the time, but there certainly was a period where your only option was to get up in the wee small hours to attend something like a webinar, and then try and be lucid and get all the information, and then walk away from it and get value from it. So yeah, it was a tough ask, but again, in today's environment, I think that's certainly changing quite dramatically.
And like today I'm doing this with you in Australia, and then 2 days from now I'm going to do a webinar with some people in the UK, and sometimes I have people from both countries at the same time on the webinar. So it is interesting how much smaller we're getting. Do you have a lot of clients outside of Australia?
Not a hell of a lot, I suppose. I think that most people are familiar with the work that I do through my blog and some of the other products that put out there. My focus was very much, I ran basically an MSP. I built an MSP, started as a single-man business, built up that to the point where I needed contractors, then built that to employees, then I had a business partner, and then sort of saw the change of the cloud coming along, and basically sold that to the business partner to focus on doing the cloud technologies. So from there, I also appreciated things like the social media, the importance of blogging, and took a very international look upon the way that I wanted to expand my business or become known, simply because, again, it gives you far more options. And that was driven by a significant change in the business that I wanted to make, and also the readings and the directions that I wanted to take. So certainly interact with a lot of people, and again, it just depends on what they're trying to achieve. But most of it in the environment that I'm in, something like SharePoint or to an extent Office 365, is not a break-fix environment. It's typically a project environment, so there's not a huge amount to interact directly, face-to-face, I suppose, or webinar to webinar sort of thing. So most of it can be done offline, or it can be through publications and things like that that I provide. So I think, yes, the majority of the publications and things that are books that I sell and people that read the blog come from the international sphere. So that's been a big benefit, and that's only been able to be accomplished given like I said, the globalization of IT.
Well, and clearly the massive growth of the internet, 20 years ago, the world was very different in terms of traveling and communicating across borders, and even making telephone calls used to be something that was a huge expense that you had to consider whether or not it was worth making a phone call to another country. And now we just go on Skype, like you say, and it's easy. So other than the language barrier, do you find that there are some key differences between the U.S. and Australia in terms of the way that people choose to do business?
I think so. I think that the big difference, I would say, is that the US is very much about enabling, is very much about understanding, or I suppose looking at technology as an investment in their business. In Australia, it tends to be a little bit more focused on what's the cost and why do we need to do this, and why should we be spending money on technology, where I think the US is a lot more understanding, or looks at the technology as an investment and how it can be used to further the business. So there are, I think, two different feelings for the way they see technology. Part of that, I think, also is the local technology industry you have over there, so that people buy products like iPads and iPhones and that sort of thing to support their local businesses, being Apple, being Google, being Microsoft. So I think that has a factor as well. Actually having the technology homegrown, if you want, does change a bit of the attitude. We're always sort of consuming it, and it's always seen, unfortunately, at the cost. We don't have that similar sort of high-tech, I suppose, well-known, large high-tech organisations that you do in the US. I think that's the core difference. To me, the US very much looks at their technology as a investment in their business, where here in Australia it's seen more as a necessary evil.
Well, one of the comments that I heard when I was down there was that when Australians look at Americans, they see what their technology will be like in 5 years. Do you think that's true?
No, I think that you're basically looking at a 6-month span. I think that, again, given the globalization of the internet, given the fact that, we can receive information quicker in a lot of cases, that you may be able to, is, I think that potentially the advantage that you've got is size and some of the capital investment that can be made to bring a technology to light quicker. But I think when it comes to adoption, Australians are pretty quick to pick up technologies, mobile phone technologies, mobile devices. Australia is a key market for a lot of multinationals to actually test their products, test their thinking. So the latest example I was involved with was Sway. So Sway is a presentation type tool from Microsoft. So they basically released that to New Zealand, then Australia, and then they were rolling it out in that sort of sphere. So in some cases we get the technology far earlier than you guys. So Again, this day and age, I don't think that there's much gap between it, and if at all, I would say 6 months, but probably even less than that nowadays.
Very nice. So when you talk to folks, across the borders, do you think that the way that we use the internet is basically the same? It's just that we use different devices, or do you think that we, like Americans, are more addicted to it?
No, I think that there's a technological difference. I think that what the US tends to potentially overlook or forget in a lot of cases is that a lot of countries outside the US can be very bandwidth challenged. So you had the experience obviously as well down here, is that unfortunately in Australia the internet isn't as ubiquitous as it is elsewhere. So a good example was a recent trip that from Redmond, is that as soon as I basically touched down in the US, I could turn on my mobile device and I effectively had free Wi-Fi, internet access, high-speed internet access wherever I went. The moment that I returned to Australia, even in the arrivals lounge waiting for the baggage on the carousel, there was no free Wi-Fi. You had to go back to using your cell, to get your data. So I think that's the fundamental difference, is that it enables your society, I suppose, to perhaps move forward, that the internet has become so ubiquitous, so you are using it for everything more and more. The difference here is that perhaps our cell phone coverage, given we have one or two large national suppliers, we don't seem to have those sort of issues you have with your mobile carriers. So it balances itself up, I think, but at the end of the day, the big difference is simply broadband speed. I mean, talk to some people in the US, some locations, and they're getting 60 megabit symmetric both ways. Where in Australia, you can struggle for 600 kilobits in some cases.
Right. Well, I did notice that, although it was interesting when I was in New Zealand, we were, the island's only so wide, right? So there was a point at which there was a lighthouse on each end of the island, and so even though we were in the middle of nowhere, we had awesome coverage because they put a cell tower on top of the lighthouses.
Exactly, but I think we're getting to a point, because we're looking at Google, the balloon project,
right.
Google's doing. We're looking at geostationary satellites. I think we're fast moving to a point. I think that it was somebody said recently, I can't remember who it was. Eric Schmidt. He sort of said, look, the internet's not going to be the internet. It's just going to be something that's ubiquitous. Everybody's going to have it everywhere there is, and there's going to be, every device will be able to connect at high speed. So that's certainly the direction I think that we're moving, is the fact that Skynet is probably not very far away.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, obviously you deal with people who are more challenged with this than we do, right? So I don't have people who can't get internet, right? And so does that change the way that you do business in Australia?
Yeah, I think it does, because as we move towards a more cloud environment, as we move to some of the dependencies, it's a very different ball game. So if you're looking at something like SharePoint's a file storage at its core. You want to get your file server or a significant amount of files up to something like SharePoint. In the US, it can take probably 2 minutes to do. Out here, it could take 2 hours, out to 20 hours, depending on the connection speed, and that then effectively makes the tool pretty useless if you can't. You can have the greatest back end, you can have the greatest resources, but if you can't actually tap them, then it's not much better than what you've probably already got. So you've got to leave it on the shelf, unfortunately. So again, there are a lot of interconnected, dependent components that we have, but again, it is changing quickly. It is improving. If you look at like a place like South Korea or Japan, where their internet access is stupendous, and the government has made it a focus of national development, that's effectively what I think we need to see, and that the companies and the businesses that will do well in the future are those based where the government understands the criticality of the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and provides that for their citizens. So I think that's one of the limitations we face here, is our government and maybe our population to an extent just doesn't appreciate or just want to invest in the national infrastructure when it comes to broadband to make give us the greatest opportunity. So that's I think our biggest challenge. And because we're a nation which is, basically the same size geographically as the continental US, but with only a tenth of the population sort of thing, this is where the costs come in. So in Australia, we've got 3 major capital cities on the east coast, and that's where the majority of the population is. And you've got to run broadband links between them, where there's probably nothing major between these capital cities, and that's a major capital expense. But to be competitive in today's digital world, I think you need to do that. So population density has allowed places like South Korea and the US to roll out these sort of networks and enable that, and that's given them a huge advantage, and certainly something I think we need to see and we need to do down here in Australia.
Well, another thing is the difference in regulations. Probably the first international project I was involved in is 1994, and it was with a paging company, and they had developed, they were rolling out to the U.S., but they developed all of their stuff in China because at the time in China, basically whoever had the biggest antenna won because there was no regulation of bandwidth. So you would just pick a band of a frequency that you wanted to play on, and you would develop your stuff on that. And if somebody else already had something there, you just blasted them out by having a bigger antenna. Obviously, the world has changed a lot since then. But even on little things, the laws every time I'm on a webinar, I hear people talking about, well, in Canada we do this, and in the U.S. we do this, in Australia we do this. And, so sometimes we have to be aware that if we're going to get clients in other countries or even partners in other countries, we have to be careful about what laws we bump into. And I don't know if there's even a clearinghouse to find out whether or not you're breaking the law.
No, I think you're looking at simple things like copyright law can be different. Again, just business incorporation, sending money, transfers, all that sort of stuff can, jump across, law issues. So I think that's part of the benefit of traveling, part of the experience of understanding another culture is to understand some of these subtle differences. So, for me, one of the best examples is the first time that I did travel to the US, traveled there on business with my boss to go to a conference, arrived in San Francisco, and the 2 things that really struck me first were the beggars on the street. Never seen those before in Australia. There were basically one on every corner at a crossroads, and they would certainly accost you for a fair amount of money. And the second thing was the plumbing. In Australia, we tend to have a tap for hot and a tap for cold, and you turn them on and the water comes out at that temperature. In the US, you've got generally, one dial, and you've got to turn it and pull this up and make the water come out. And I can remember spending at least 10 minutes trying to work out the bathroom for the very first time. So after that, you're fine. But simple, subtle things like that can make a very big difference, and can stop you from initially achieving what you want. So I think that's what the traveling gives you, is that experience, that exposure, that understanding that, hey, even though we might speak the same language, there are some differences that I need to understand and overcome if I want to obviously move forward. I mean, there's a lot of benefits, but there are those again, simple, subtle things that can provide initial roadblockers.
Well, that's certainly an argument for leaving a day early and making sure that you spend some time getting acculturated before you have to do your business.
Well, I think part of it is that, again, the internet provides a lot of that, but there are simple things that, you do overlook. So, I mean, if you're traveling, you don't want to carry a huge amount of cash on you. How do you get that? How does, using the teller machines, what's your fallback? What's your, if you do have issues, so like good old IT stuff, what's your DR? How do you survive? And I think the benefit of traveling for business and building the relationships is that if you have someone local, it certainly makes it a lot easier to travel with, to ask questions, to do all the rudimentary stuff, pick you up from maybe the airport, or make sure that you can get a train to your location, give you general directions every day. That sort of stuff just makes traveling so much easier, rather than having to worry about, am I on time, where have I got to go, especially if you travel by yourself, or in small small groups or whatever. It certainly helps to have the knowledge of a local.
Well, the other thing is that sometimes when we go to other countries, we forget that some other places might be easier for them to get to than the U.S. Like, for example, in Australia, if you're over in Perth, it might be easier to get to South Africa than to the U.S. I mean, just in terms of how much travel is involved.
Yeah, and I think that, again, Perth is on, basically on the west coast of Australia. It's probably I believe it's the most isolated capital city in the world. So one direction you've got, Johannesburg, on the other direction you've got Sydney, and it's sort of, 4 to 5 hours generally to travel to Sydney. So, that's a long way even for, locals. And the difference between us and the US is generally there's nothing between Sydney, and no major cities generally between Sydney and Perth on a flight, whereas in the US, it's 20 miles and you're in the next largest city. So again, population plays a big part, which I think that people in the US tend to overlook, is that, out here in Australia, there are just those major capital cities and nothing in between generally.
Right. Well, so I don't know if you know Rusty Brown from Wyoming.
Yes. Yes.
So he's on the call, and he's, mentioning about that, a lot of his clients have satellite internet, because that's what they can get in Wyoming. Wyoming is also an example of, it's a bit of a drive to get to the next state.
No, look, and I think you do get, places in the US which are exactly the same, but they're very much, I suppose, when you look at the overall population density, they are the minority. You certainly have those, but again, in Australia, it is a sort of a different setup, and it's just simply the population density. Now, in the US, you've got, a place like New York, which has a population roughly the same as Australia. So you have Australia's population in a single city. Now, that's a completely different mindset, and I was lucky enough to spend 15 months there working on Wall Street around Y2K to do that. And again, that's a very eye-opening experience to actually work in an environment, in a foreign country, and experience that day to day rather than just traveling. So, yeah, look, there are certainly places that have a great similarity, but again, if we're looking at averages, that's very much the difference, I think, in the US. But certainly there are pockets where you'll get internet connectivity which is even worse than we would get here in Australia. So again, travelling to that, understanding that, certainly helps your outlook, when it comes to providing services or working with technologies.
All righty. Now I'm going to change topics and talk about books. And I can't remember if you sent me a list of books or not. If you did, I couldn't find them.
No, I don't think I did. Oh. But the book, again, I would reinforce Harry's book choice from last thing, which was The World is Flat. I think the first half of that book basically opened my eyes, changed my whole business perspective, made me think about the globalization and changing the business, and focus more on a global situation. So again, definitely worth a read, certainly the first half. The second half is about sort of the Arab world. I think that is also very interesting, but perhaps not as relevant to our discussion. The second book which you've got there is The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I'm a very big Tim Ferriss fan because I like his ability to basically break down, the stereotypes. Is this really the case? And what that book taught me was the fact is you don't have to do it all for yourself. So I didn't have to build an organisation of 20, 30 employees and keep going down that path. I could use outsourcing. I could, again, go to the internet and use freelancer and those sort of Odesk opportunities to find people, find the skills, find the resources I need, and generally ended up being, much better, much more convenient, and also much cheaper. So certainly the world is flat. The 4-Hour Workweek, the stuff by Tim Ferriss, I think is fantastic. to change your outlook, make you think the 80-20 rule, is it actually the case? And the third book I'd certainly quote is one called Fast Lane Millionaire by MJ DeMarco. Bad name, unfortunately, bad title, but once you get past that, his thinking, the way he talks about things, very plain English speaking, he understands the fact that the internet's all about size. So if you grow your business by either selling more product or selling product for a greater value. However, you can exponentially grow your business if you increase both simultaneously. So that's sort of the essence of his book, and that, again, opened my eyes more to the fact of, there's a big world out there with billions of people, and again, if you can sell a product or a service into even a minute part of that, well, then you're doing pretty well.
All right. Well, I will definitely put The Millionaire Fast Lane, Crack the Code to Wealth and Live Rich for a Lifetime by MJ DeMarco. I will put that up on the site as a reference. It's interesting. I'm kind of a Tim Ferriss anti-fan. I have bought 2 different versions of this book. I personally would not want this guy living next door to me or interacting with my children in any way. I think that he does more than work the system. I think he tries to cheat the system. Having said that, he's got a lot of really great stuff about leveraging the resources that are out there and thinking beyond your own borders and thinking beyond the limits of how we've done business in the past. And
well, I think that the difference he brings to the table is again, he's looking at the system, what's the optimal that I can get out of it. And I think that in today's age, especially in business, you can become very comfortable in the way that you do things traditionally. It's always worked this way, it's always been fine, and I've been able to get on, and I've been able to do, well. And the reality is a lot of that, I think, people have got by potentially on luck, or they've, it's just been dumb luck that they've been able to do it. I think he's able to look at the system and analyze it and find out what's the optimal I can get out of this for the minimal amount of effort. Now, at the end of the day, ethically, yeah, perhaps that's not what is everybody's cup of tea, but I think that from a business point of view, that's what we're trying to achieve. What's the minimal input for the maximum output? And at that core, I think that there's a lot of benefit. And this day and age, there's a lot of shortcuts that can be taken, and if you don't as a business, chances are the next business that comes along will do that and take advantage of that, and you'll be left struggling. And we see that, in my opinion, when we've moved to cloud technologies, when we're moving to the next stage of the Internet of Things or whatever. There's a lot of businesses now that have become so comfortable in the way they're doing stuff is that they're just getting left behind and they're unable to keep up. So I think that the mantra that he brings is uncomfortable, it's challenging for a lot of people, but it's more and more the case of that the way the world is working, and it flattens out and gives everybody potentially the opportunity to take advantage of what is out there.
Right. Well, it also opens your eyes to the fact that there's a lot of people all over the world with amazing talents that you can tap into. And he gives a lot of examples of that. But, we have used so much stuff here that, we use Odesk. We've hired several people through Odesk. When we need graphics, we go to Fiverr, and sometimes we get somebody in New York, and sometimes we get them in the Philippines, and so there's all kinds of stuff. I recently talked to a friend of mine, Travis, he loves this group called Fancy Hands, where it's like $5 to do a task, and then it just doesn't matter what the task is. It might be to do research, it might be to write a paper, it might be to do all kinds of things, and it's interesting because I hear people say, oh, you should buy locally and do everything local and support your local business and all that. And I kind of believe the opposite. I think that we have a responsibility to spread the labor and the wealth around the world and to make these other companies, these other countries reliant on us and interconnected with us. And we need to rely on them. And that way, I think it's the way to peace, ultimately, is for us to be connected to each other and rely on each other and to need each other. And that only happens when we actually create those connections across borders.
Well, one of the good examples I had was when I was travelling in France. We were staying at a B&B, and we were actually touring the World War I battlefields, and they had basically a maid or a house cleaner come in and tidy up after we'd left for the day and straighten the beds and change the linen and all that. And for someone in Australia, that was a bit uncomfortable to think somebody else was coming in and sort of cleaning your room and doing all that. And when we spoke to the owners, they basically said, look, that's the way it is. They saw it as their way of spreading the wealth. We take money at the higher end, obviously, to provide these sort of tours, but then we do spend some of it, obviously, on people locally to come in and do the cleaning and do that around. We could certainly do it all ourselves and save the money, but they certainly looked at it as an obligation to provide other people employment in their business. And I think that it's fast becoming the case where you need to pick the best person for the job. And in a lot of cases, local may not be the best person. And I think that, again, you need to choose wisely. But you're right, I think that there is a significant amount of wealth that could be distributed and could obviously make a lot of people's lives a lot better very quickly and very simply. And the Internet's, again, provides an ability to do that. There's very much that can be done remotely these days that really you don't need to be local to achieve.
Well, and another thing is that sometimes the people that you're working with, for example, are very well educated and can do things that would cost a fortune in the U.S., and because of the economic variance, it's much cheaper. Example, a friend of mine had dozens of pages on his website that he wanted to kind of rejigger and rewrite and focus more on certain keywords and kind of bring up to date because they were a little old. And he's hired somebody in the Philippines with a PhD who was happy to do this at a fraction of what it would have cost in the U.S. And so he got a very high level of support, and they probably earned a pretty good salary for their economy.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that it's no different to hiring someone local. You don't abdicate the job. You've still got to manage it and outline it and all that sort of stuff. But I think, again, the reality is that, the ease of communication, the ease of money transfer using things like PayPal and whatever, especially for micro amounts, I think are phenomenal. One of the charities that I, again, support and recommend and basically found through my US readings was a place called Kiva, so kiva.org. What they are is all about microloans, so they give people in all parts of the world a small amount of money to allow them to expand their farm, get more animals, buy product to sell in a store. But Kiva has taken this and basically made it a marketplace where you can go in and nominate the amount of money that you wish to donate. Those people then pay those micro loans back to you over a period of time, and then you can reinvest that money. So I think that's a very, very good example of how you can use your international reach and your funds to support people internationally, and the technology that Kiva has put together enables that quickly and easily. And again, I certainly support that wholeheartedly, being running my own business, and commend that to anybody to have a look. But at a business level, again, very, very smart way to tap into financing, group financing, beyond what you would normally see from financial institutions.
Right. Now, the other book that I put up here is one that I enjoyed very much, and it's kind of focused on larger businesses. It's a little from the perspective of a corporation that wants to move into another country, and how you go about figuring out what you need to do in that country, and a lot about the cultural differences and so forth. And I think even though there are some noticeable differences, I think if you stay within the English-speaking, the former British colonies, there's not that much of huge, big norms that are different. But once you start moving outside of that, then things really are quite dramatically different in some countries. So anyway, this book has got some good perspective on some of the do's and don'ts, and what to expect and what not to expect. And so if folks are thinking about looking into other countries, one of the best things you can do is read up a bit on it and then go visit before you do business, so that you have some sense of how well you fit with that culture.
And I think also too, a lot of it is that, again, if you can look to a local partnership, if you can build a relationship with somebody local, you can start off very small. Something like Odesk or Freelancer allows you to, get involved perhaps in that region in a very small way for a couple of dollars, and then you can, scroll it up. But at its core, as you said, Carl, business is business. You work with people that you trust. The way that you get trust is you build that relationship, and that's what business is really all about. And that's what it should be about, and certainly the technology allows us to do that, but I think many people tend to overlook the fact that, at its core, all this stuff is hopefully providing a better connection between people, and should be used in that respect, basically not used as, a game or whatever, which unfortunately you see a lot of these days.
Right. Well, it does. I always think it's funny. I'll go to the next slide here, because when you look at the distance, it is quite amazing that I don't know how many trips a year you make to the U.S., but it's at least a couple, right?
Yeah, generally it is. It varies, obviously, year to year, and it varies on the cost of our dollar and things like that. For me, it's obviously a big hike because being a single-man business, I am away from my business during that time. There is a recovery period either side, to overcome the jet lag and those sort of things. So, yeah, look, it's a big commitment, and if you're travelling, don't forget, if you're travelling to somewhere like Redmond, you've got to travel to, LA and then change and get to Redmond. So it's the last trip, obviously, up for Office 365 Nation was, a 24-hour door-to-door sort of requirement. So. But the thing is, with people in Australia, because we are so remote, travelling anywhere generally is a long haul, so we are, I suppose, used to it. So that is the difference. We do live a long way, so we do appreciate that. To get anywhere else, we do have to travel a fair distance.
Right. And it's also important that folks who are thinking about traveling are aware of those differences. It isn't just that it's a long, long ways, but, you're approaching 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, right? So it's there's real differences in terms of what people are going through and what their experience is. So it's part of being part of this global community, is understanding that not everybody is worried that it's going to take you an extra 20 minutes because your client is down in the valley, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that's, again, part of it is that the international travel has become so ubiquitous and relatively so easy. I mean, even 100 years ago, we probably didn't have cars necessarily everywhere. We didn't have planes. We didn't have this sort of travel. And now, effectively you can step on a plane and be anywhere else in the world almost within 24 hours. So, that is a fantastic ability. That is something that everybody should take advantage of, whether through business or through pleasure, because, again, the planet and the people are just so amazing, and to actually step outside your sphere is again, you will step outside your comfort zone, and you certainly learn, so much, and you really take a lot away from it. So my experience is that when I finished my university or college education, I decided to get straight into the workforce and knuckle down and be successful, where a lot of my friends decided to take their gap year or travel around Europe. And I was very much, a few years into it, I sort of did regret that. So that's why I took the opportunity to travel, as part of business as much as I could, because, again, I don't think those experiences have done you any harm. They've certainly opened my eyes. And again, when you read about a place, when you see about a place on television, it's always a good feeling to know that you've been there and experienced it, and you actually know what it's like. So I think it certainly opens your eyes and makes life so much more enjoyable to actually step out of your comfort zone and go somewhere else and actually see how others live.
And do you find it to be advantageous to be from a country that's part of the Commonwealth, and that there's different visa restrictions?
Not when I travel to the US, I'll tell you, man. You guys do everything backwards to the British. I'll tell you, your doors open different ways, your light switches work the opposite ways, the water goes down the drain the opposite way.
It's a hardship.
So difficult. Oh man, it's so difficult to cope with. I mean, you don't use vowels when you spell colour. It's just almost unacceptable. Look, I don't think it matters. I think the language certainly helps when you need to ask a question of how do I get here, how do I move here, where's the bathroom. Those sort of things are certainly handy. But I think, with a fair amount of sense and a fair amount of preparation, you can certainly get the same sort of comfort. But again, being in that outside your comfort zone once you get used to it is where a lot of the experiences, where a lot of the great experiences are. So traveling somewhere like Japan or China or those sort of regions, again, can really sharpen you up and sort of say, it's amazing that not everywhere in the world speaks English, and there are people outside my region that if I want to do business with, I perhaps need to learn their language and their culture.
Well, one of the things I was disappointed with when we went to Australia was they didn't stamp my passport. It's all electronic now. So
exactly. I think that's again the way that we're seeing things. We're seeing that there are so many people travelling, and they're so demanding to get through the borders and get through customs that, yeah, exactly, the electronic side of it. So when we travel to the US, we need to complete forms with your Homeland Security, and that's all done online and again ready for us before we even step on the plane. So again, that's where technology has made that facility so much easier. And again, that's what we're seeing with this globalization of IT. All these systems are becoming interconnected, and that certainly provides benefit when you do something like travel and you can connect to the hotel and make payments and do that remotely. But my fear is on the other side we're becoming so dependent on each other, as we saw with the global financial crisis, is we have one hiccup and it brings the whole system down now because we're so interconnected. And I think that's what a lot of people overlook. I mean, we see it more perhaps in technology. If my server fails, then nobody in my business can work. I didn't realize that, those sort of things. So unfortunately, I think we're fast moving to a world where, yeah, every little piece of the system is going to become critical.
Right. Well, and when we traveled, this is the first time that I had to fill out paperwork about whether or not I had visited West Africa, and there was basically Ebola paperwork I had to fill out to when we entered Australia. So that was kind of unusual.
Well, I think again a lot of it is that because again we're in an interconnected world, and as potentially someone from those regions could travel home to Australia. When I travelled, for example, to Europe, they had, they had the swine flu or whatever, and you had to, make sure that you shoot. They asked you whether you'd been walking around in fields with cattle and sheep, and then they had to, clean your shoes and disinfect them. So yeah, at the end of the day, because people can travel so broadly, yeah, it's potential that you could be somewhere that could, cause a problem. When you do return. Yeah,
there's just recently an alert. They have somebody somewhere has got some swine flu in Washington State, so China stopped the imports of any birds from Washington State to China, because they don't need another swine flu outbreak.
Well, I think part of it also too, unfortunately, is that we allow the media to dominate us. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't seem to think for themselves. They simply swallow what the media says to them. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that is obviously negative. A lot of that is reinforcing stereotypes because it makes easy headlines. I think that a lot of people who have travelled extensively or travelled to these regions would question that. So again, as we become global, unfortunately, like I said, I think that we've concentrated our media into a number of small organisations that, again, are influencing a disproportionate number of people. And I think, again, one of the culprits potentially is, the ex-Australian Rupert Murdoch. So the amount of control that he exercises over, the influence of people is quite significant. So, again, we may think that we're becoming more diversified, but in some cases we're not. These large multinational organisations basically are living above governments and calling the shots. So again, look at Microsoft. Microsoft, as an example, is basically selling its product to a worldwide market above, any it's now sort of a world entity where the Australian government, it's limited to its borders sort of thing. So again, I think we're seeing this transition from a where the government, is, I suppose an important aspect of people's lives is actually declining, and it's becoming more about the corporations because they've just got such worldwide reach.
It also allows us to look at things very differently. I was just reading a story about how Tony Hsieh was trying to figure out how to get Zappos shoe sales in Europe, and the shipping, the fast, cheap, easy shipping that we have in the U.S. just doesn't exist there, and so he created a whole different system of delivering things to mailboxes that he owned, and that allowed him to make just one big shipment a day to each of his physical locations. And now Amazon is looking at bringing that model to the United States. So, we go try things where they work and it makes sense, and then we think, oh, I wonder if that would work here too.
I think that's what a global aspect gives you, a global outlook gives you that, I've seen things and, I didn't think about that, and, that's interesting, why does that work over here, and this is, this is different. So, a good example perhaps of the differences is that because I'd lived in the US and been there, I understood what Starbucks was and what it was all about. When they finally did arrive here in Australia, I thought, oh, I'll partake of this because I am a bit familiar with what's going on here. When I went to the store that had opened up in the middle of in Sydney, the line was around the corner and 2 blocks down the street, and it wasn't necessarily because it was so popular. It was because when Australians got to the counter, they were bombarded with a list of questions. Whether you want grande, venti, do you want skim milk, do you want half and half? All these questions they weren't prepared for. They had to make all these choices at the counter, and obviously they had to sit there and, oh, hang on, what do I want? I just want coffee. No, you can't have just coffee. You've got to answer all these questions. So again, it is a slightly different, a different culture. But again, we're seeing that with the travel people who are coming and those organisations spreading to locations around the world, that we're getting this uniformity. But again, simple things like that could mean that in the case for the shop in Sydney, they couldn't serve as many people as they wanted to because the customers just weren't ready for what they needed to do at the point of purchase.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. And I walked into the McDonald's is very different there, and it's like I'm not sure how to order coffee, so it took us 10 minutes to order coffee the first time we were in McDonald's. So
I tried.
Yeah, and I think that those simple things can cause great consternation until you get used to them, until you understand the process, and it can be a little bit intimidating, especially in a high pressure, high volume environment. So again, that's one of the benefits of travelling. That's one of the benefits of understanding how the system works outside your own little locality, I think.
very good. Well, we're almost out of time, so let me open this to questions. If anybody has a question, go ahead and type it into the question tool within the webinar, or if you wish to raise your hand, I'd be happy to open a mic, as long as we don't have 15 mics open at the same time. We do have a variety of people on here. No questions for Robert? Alrighty. Well, we'll see if anybody types anything in. In the meantime, Robert, is there a great place for people to get a hold of you?
The best place, obviously, is my website, ciaops.com. Again, that'll link to the blog. I do a podcast. I do a modicum of many other things. My publications are there. So there's plenty of offerings that are available for you there at ciaops.com. But again, if you want to contact me directly, certainly feel free to do that. Happy to answer any emails, and the email address is director@ciaops.com, or just contact Carl and he can forward them on to me. The other thing I'll note, Carl, is that, do you remember when you and I first met face-to-face?
Oh my goodness, that's probably 10 years ago. No, I don't.
Well, I remember that we had a mutual contact who put us together to share the SharePoint guide that I was trying to get out, and he listed that through your your SMB Books site.
Right.
And then after I sold my MSP business to my business partner, I attended an SMB conference run by Harry Brailsford in Seattle. And I was speaking on SharePoint, and that's where we met for the first time downstairs in that convention center, I suppose, garage or hall as it was, I suppose.
Yes.
And you were running a competition to have a shot at a little plastic duck. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I still have that little plastic duck in my hand, which sits on my desk today, reminding me of the very first trip that I took overseas and met Mr. Carl. So there you go.
Wow. Well, that would have been 2008.
Correct. Exactly right.
So that's 7 years ago. Well, I'm glad that I did meet you, and I'm very grateful to you for the work that we have done together over the years, and I always enjoy having you with us. I believe that you're going to be a speaker at our SMB online conference in June. So
yep,
we will be very, very happy to have you there as well.
I'll make sure that I use all the vowels and teach you exactly what they're supposed to be used for.
Well, we have a vowel shortage in the United States, so bring some extra U's to put some color into the presentation.
No problems.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, and I thank everybody who tuned in today. We're going to get a recording of this up, and then also you can listen to the recording from last month of Harry Brailsford, and tune in again next month. What we're going to do, we're going to move this to 10 o'clock, and so it will be February the 24th, 10 a.m., and then the final Tuesday of each month for this entire year. We're going to talk about the globalization of SMB. And next week or next month, we're going to talk specifically about some of the details of traveling to another country specifically to look at doing business with them. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a spectacular day tomorrow.
Thank you, Carl, and I'm already experiencing it now, so you don't have to worry.
All righty. Thanks all.